Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. You hear that music in the background. That means it's time for the Hillsdale Dialogue. Enough of tariffs, enough of Iran. We turn to big, important stuff. Dr. Arnn is gone for a couple of weeks, so we're taking a detour from Churchill's World War II memoirs into something almost as English as Churchill. I guess we have to count Shakespeare as English as Churchill. I'm joined by Dr. Khalil Habib. He's been a guest before. He's back from Hillsdale. He's got a very interesting background. He went to the University of Maine. I got to figure what that's out. He's got a doctorate in political theory, his master's in political theory, and he teaches Shakespeare and political theory up at Hillsdale College, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Dr. Habib, welcome back, Professor. Why did you go to the University of Maine? I live a quarter of the year in Maine. I'm just curious.
Oh, I didn't know that. It was really just a function of my family living in Maine at the time. And it was a great education, and I really couldn't ask for more. I went in intending to go to law school, but I was very fortunate. I had two excellent teachers in political science who really turned me on to political theory and the Claremont School and approach to political thought. So I was hooked from the beginning. And at one point I thought of transferring. And when I would visit other schools and see what they were teaching or not teaching, and then I would compare that back with the University of Maine and what I was getting for an education, I stayed and got what I think was an outstanding undergraduate education. And so from there, they really led me to a serious life of the mind. They involved me in their own research. They would take me to conferences with them. And so I got to see a hidden world, at least hidden from my sight. And I'll never forget my undergraduate teacher, Michael Palmer, and Jim Warhola, both of them were really instrumental in my formation, was reading a book. And I said, well, what is that? And he said, oh, you have to get it. It's called Vindicating the Founders by Tom West. And I was an undergraduate at the time. And I think I told Tom this story. And of course, anyone who's familiar with Hillsdale knows that Tom is now my colleague. And we teach together in the same department. But I still have my original copy of Dr. West's book, Vindicating the Founders. And so I've always been in that, aligned with our department and with Dr. Arnn and his vision of liberal education. So Maine may seem like a random place disconnected from where I am today, but I really owe it to those two professors who opened my eyes and directed me.
Were you on the Augusta campus?
It was in the Orono campus. There is an Augusta campus. My family was from Augusta, but we meaning my brother and I, my elder brother and I, went to the University of Maine at Orono, which is about an hour and 20 minutes north. And it's their flagship campus, and the law school's down in Portland. And University of Maine at Orono is, and I probably still is, mostly known for their excellent engineering programs. And but at the time, my brother and I both thought we're going to law school, political sciences, where it's at. And I never imagined. In fact, I avoided the political theory course because I didn't know what it was. And I thought it's fluff. I wanted to do hardcore political science. Little did I know that one class on Plato's Republic was going to fundamentally change my life. And I look back and I don't think there's nothing I would change. No, I wouldn't be at Hillsdale today if it wasn't for that education.
It's fascinating about education. By the way, their Maine law school is very good. I have a colleague, Professor Norkey, who teaches there. Their specialty is Arctic law, and they do everything to do with the law of the sea. They're very, very good on many, many things. I don't know the University of Maine well, and if you had Straussians at the University of Maine, I'm astonished. Were they Straussians?
They were Straussians. Now, Jim Warhola was Straussian friendly. His area was medieval church-state relations. And he and Michael Palmer were just very good friends, and there was mutual respect. And I was introduced to medieval thought through Jim and Michael, and I consider them friends. It took me a long time to refer to them by their first name, but they insisted after I graduated. And Michael Palmer definitely is Straussian. He had studied with Alan Bloom, I believe, at the University of Toronto. and both of them really were just exceptional teachers, and they really set a high bar. I mean, I don't want to mention the names of the schools that I visited that I was accepted to when I was young and thinking, oh, I could do better, I'm going to go and transfer. I won't mention them, but I will say they're prestigious. And in one of them, I didn't even stay overnight as I was supposed to. I knew right away that what I was getting from these Straussians and from Jim Warhola at the University of Maine was just so much better. It was just richer. I had Shakespeare in high school. I didn't appreciate him. I never knew philosophy even existed until I got to the University of Maine. And I don't know if you remember your first experience when you come into contact with a book that literally opens a lost world for you. It felt like Narnia to me. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. And,
absolutely. Augustine's Confessions. And it wasn't taught by a Straussian, but then I figured out how to read it like a Straussian. For our readers who are listeners who aren't out there, Leo Strauss is sort of the king of Straussland. And below him are these various princes like Harvey Mansfield and Harry Jeff and Martin Diamond and Nathan Tarkov, and Alan Bloom it might even be the deputy king. And I had Harvey Mansfield. I was never smart enough to be a Straussian. I just not. I tell people that I'm a lawyer. That's why, because I'm not smart enough to be a Straussian. But it sure was dramatic to hear them lecture, to hear Harvey Mansfield lecture. That's like going to a concert. And I'm sure that was your experience with your professors. And do your students take to it this way?
They do. I mean, a lot of them who come to Hillsdale they're very religiously serious, morally serious. They love ideas. I mean, I was just speaking to our new hire, John Petrakis, in our politics department. He teaches constitutional law. And he comes from Notre Dame. He was on the Princeton program with Robbie George. And he swears he's never seen anything like the Hillsdale students. I mean, I am teaching at any given moment at Hillsdale, original texts that you would have to be at a very unique honors program at some other school if you're lucky. And our students just get it in their general education there. And a lot of them first of all, I'm not sure how familiar your audience is with what that even means, Straussian or Strauss.
Please explain. They're not. Assume that they're dummies.
So Leo Strauss was a German immigrant who came to the United States, and he had studied with Martin Heidegger, who many would consider one of the most important philosophers in the modern world, not necessarily morally serious, and there's a lot of problems with Martin Heidegger, among which was his affiliation with the Nazi Party. But Strauss studied with some very formidable people in Germany, and when he came to the United States, I believe Harry Jaffa met him when Strauss taught at the New School in New York. And then when he went to the University of Chicago, that's where people like Nathan Tarkov and Alan Bloom, I believe, came into contact with him. Tom West, I believe, came into contact with him when Strauss moved toward the end of his life to Claremont. So what Straussianism means, if you were to just explain it as simply as possible, it's taking a look at ideas in a ahistorical way. And I will tell you, when I was an undergrad, nothing exposed my modern prejudices than taking a course on, say, Plato's Republic. And every modern prejudice I had was exposed and made visible. And that's the first step towards self-knowledge. Now, what do I mean by that? I simply assumed, like a lot of people, that if it's old, it's wrong, and that history just necessarily progresses, and we intellectually and morally are superior to the past. That was certainly my belief. And as I was reading The Republic, which Straussians would take very seriously as a timeless work, as opposed to a work caught in the time capsule of its own historical era, which would mean, if true, there'd be no point in studying them other than just archaeological artifacts of previous eras. And so we place ourselves in a position of moral and intellectual superiority without knowing the roots of our own beliefs and our prejudices. So that was eye-opening. I mean, when we got to Plato's Republic, we went through the cave, the allegory of the cave, and the divided line. I was, for the first time, put into contact with a book that predates Christianity, that obviously predates the American founding, that took very seriously timeless truths and also man's longing for immortality, to find something eternal in his life. And man, once you're bit by that, there's no going back. And so when you say Straussian approach to education, it primarily means looking at ideas as if they're timeless and as a mirror to exposing one's own limitations. And so at the end of the day, its ultimate aim is self-knowledge. And that ran against everything else I heard at the time when I was an undergraduate. I remember taking a philosophy class and being completely turned off by it after my encounter with the Republic taught in this way. The first thing the professor said is, well, we're not going to really study anything ancient like Plato and Aristotle because they were wrong. We were never shown why they were. There was no argument. But I immediately recognized the prejudice that I, at one point, had myself.
When I come back with Dr. Habib, we're going to pick up there because it's a great intro to Strauss and Shakespeare with some Montesquieu thrown in. That's this week and next week. And the Shakespeare, for those of you who want to read ahead, is the Henry VI trilogy and Richard III. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. This is the Hillsdale Dialogue, all collected at hughfordhillsdale.com.
Hello, this is Jeremiah Regan, and I have some great news. We've brought Hillsdale's incredibly popular free online courses to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. The Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast brings you our online courses in their entirety, with courses ranging from ancient history and biblical epics to foundational political principles and the future of American citizenship. Follow the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast to hear new episodes every week with additional commentary and insights from our team. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu to learn more. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All prior dialogues are collected at hughfordhillsdale.com. Dr. Khalil Habib is my guest. Dr. Habib is a professor at Hillsdale College in political theory. In the first segment, and we're doing this week and next week today because I'm going to be gone next week, Dr. Arnn is gone, we're talking about Shakespeare, Montesquieu, Leo Strauss. And we're starting with Straussianism. And Dr. Habib, I said when we went out to break, not a lot of Straussians will be very forthcoming about what it is that they do and why they do it. That's been my experience over 50 years. You're different. Why is that?
Well, it stems from my own personal experience. I mean, when I first came into contact with Straussian education, it liberated me from the idea that the here and now is necessarily superior to the past. And there's certainly, obviously, some advancements. I mean, the Federalists talk about advancements in political science. So it's not that we don't think that progress can be made in certain areas. But what I found liberating and why I've been very open with my students, because I want to replicate that experience that was transformative for me. Once I came to realize that I was living a life ignoring and not taking seriously the idea that truth can be accessible to human beings and it's necessary to live a good and morally and philosophically serious life, then the question becomes, well, which path should one take? And Strauss very famously has the formula of Jerusalem and Athens. And in other words, the tradition of faith and reason. And for me, and I spent decades really wrestling with that, and I didn't know why he put it in terms of attention. And it was really when I started studying medieval thought where I wanted to know. I mean, as a Christian myself, as a Catholic specifically, not that it's relevant. I mean, you could be Jewish, Protestant, it doesn't matter. I wanted to know why this dichotomy and why did he see an inherent tension in it. He believed that philosophy means the autonomy of human reason, and faith would mean what it says, taking a leap of faith in trust in God. And so that really made me want to turn to medieval thought. And it wasn't an academic interest at all. It was genuinely, I don't know what you want to call it, existential or religious. And I studied everything. I spent 5 years studying Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed with a rabbi, a friend of mine who has a PhD in philosophy, Josh Golding, who I absolutely adore. And then I spent years and years reading the Muslim philosophers and genuinely coming at it from the point of view like, okay, whoever makes sense to me will make sense to me. I'll just follow the arguments and see where the truth takes me. And then it was spending several years doing a real deep dive in Aquinas' Summa that really tied it together.
Now,
So
medieval
Strauss,
thought, how do we define it? Because yesterday, believe it or not, I had to spend 2 or 3 hours researching the common law tort and the common law crime of misconduct in public office, which is not a statutory crime in England, but it's what Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has been charged with. And I went deeper and deeper. The thing starts in 1100. It's really remarkable. Its first cases on record are in 1600. There's so much to learn about misconduct in public office that's got nothing to do with statute. I was lost. How did you get lost in medievalism?
Oh, well, first of all, it's very easy to get lost in medievalism. There's really two ways to look at it. One, you can look at medievalism politically, and for us, with respect to the Christendom, that would refer to the feudal era, and that essentially really begins across Europe after the collapse of the Roman Empire. So when you look at, for example, the very end of Montesquieu's book of the Spirit of the Laws, he is very much interested in feudalism. Tocqueville's reflections on the French Revolution are interested in feudalism. And by medieval, for them, they're referring to the phenomenon of decentralized government with a very pronounced church, pronounced aristocracy, and the monarchy. Medievalism, with respect to philosophy and theology, refers not so much to the political side, but rather to the belief that faith and reason are either in harmony or in conflict. And so they tend to look more at the theological. And medieval begins, intellectually anyway, with the emergence of the Bible, with the Old Testament, and Socrates or Plato. And you have what at first appears to be competing claims about the autonomy of the human intellect, the duties and loyalty that one owes to their faith and to God. And what ends up happening, and I don't know really where Strauss, ultimately what motivated him, but I know that the effect it had on me was it created an antinomy, a tension. And I believe he had a Platonic intention with that. And what I mean by that is by drawing a sharp contrast between them, almost to the point where they appear irreconcilable, he forces you to think about what a contradiction is. And that is very Socratic. That's what Plato does throughout all of his dialogues. Every single one of them ends with what seems like an irreconcilable problem. And there's a pedagogical reason to do that. The mind is not created to live in contradiction. Its purpose is to understand and to have and possess a self-evident truth. And so when you're confronted with a square circle, obviously you stop and pause and start to think. So I don't know what his intentions were, but I know that almost everything Strauss touched always led to a Platonic end. There was always some kind of tension. Modernity is great, but it's in tension with the ancients.
So when your students get up there to Hillsdale and they find Professor Habib, what are they signing up for? I mean, what do you teach them in what order, and in what order do you want them to take the courses? Sure.
Well, thankfully, that's laid out by our core. In general, and because I'm in the politics department, most of my teaching consists of our required course, the U.S. Constitution. I'm teaching a course now on Shakespeare and Montesquieu, but I've taught Tocqueville and Islamic thought and you name it. And what I do want my students to get out of my classes, and I believe, I'm successful in doing this, I always present the books, no matter what I'm teaching, as though they're absolutely true. And I make sure that they all contradict each other, that there's a debate, a dialogue going between them, between the authors. And so it doesn't really matter if they take them in a chronological order or not. They could start in early modern, but any great early modern or late modern thinker is already in dialogue with previous thinkers. So there is a way to go backwards, so to speak. So that was my case. I was infatuated with Machiavelli and Hobbes.
Bingo.
And Montesquieu.
Yep. That's where I started. No, I started with Machiavelli. Of course. Yeah.
With Mansfield, right?
Yep.
And if you read those books carefully, they point you in the direction of the past because they want to vindicate their arguments in light of their interlocutors who went before them. And so it almost doesn't matter where you start. I think it's more important where you end. And I think the purpose really of a liberal education, at least that as we presented at Hillsdale, is to put students into contact with the most challenging, rigorous set of ideas, whether it's in the English department, politics, philosophy, because we know they're coming with moral and intellectual seriousness. And the best thing you could do for them is to show them the many paths that they can take to pursue something that they're genuinely interested in.
No thin gruel, all meat and potatoes at Hillsdale. I'm going to turn to Henry VI after this and to Richard III, so don't go anywhere. This is part one. Part two will be next week with Professor Khalil Habib of Hillsdale. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of these dialogues collected at HughForHillsdale.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Khalil Habib is my guest of Hillsdale, hillsdale.edu. We're about to plunge in to Henry VI and Richard III. Now, when I got the outline from Dr. Habib, my eyes rolled back in my head because I haven't read, I think, Henry VI Part 3 in 25 years, and I've only heard Richard III. So I'm like completely unprepared. Normally, you give me a book, I can read a book, but I can't get up to speed. And we got lots of Steelers fans, Dr. Habib, so they don't even know who Henry the VI is. And Richard III might be, the left tackle. Why don't you tell them what we're going to do, then we'll do it, then we'll tell them what we did.
Sure. So the Henry VI plays, and as you said at the outset of the show, is a trilogy that Shakespeare wrote that is part of a long and very complicated history that shows the emergence of the English-speaking peoples. Now, I know you and Dr. Arnn love Churchill, as you should, and Churchill absolutely loved Shakespeare and loved the English history plays. And in some ways, I think he might have even modeled some of his writings after Shakespeare. So they're not that foreign to your audience. Unfortunately, and I don't know why, Richard VI is hardly read or studied today. Everybody knows Richard III. Everybody knows Hamlet. Everybody knows Romeo and Juliet. But the Henry VI plays, though, are part of a much longer series of plays that begin with King John, the play King John, and then they end with Henry VIII. And writers like Montesquieu, who celebrated the English Constitution, I've started noticing are drawing a lot of their understanding of English customs and English institutions from those plays. So I was attracted to those plays for a reason. I really wanted to understand the American cultural inheritance that our founders brought with them. Let me just say one quick comment about the importance of Shakespeare, though, for an American audience. Alexis de Tocqueville came to the United States around the time of Andrew Jackson's presidency, and he makes the following observation, which I think is incredibly important for us today. And that is, no matter where he traveled in the country, he always found in any log home across this great country, he said, the complete works of Shakespeare. And then later in his book, In Democracy in America, he makes the suggestion that Americans should really remain in intellectual contact with England, because he believed and traced the spirit of American liberty to what he said, and this is quoting Tocqueville, pre-Tudor England. And so where are you going to find Shakespeare discussing that? And you're going to find them in those English history plays. They're long, they're very complicated. We've never lived under kings, so it's a bit of a foreign form of government for us. But when you read them, it becomes very obvious that they share a lot of the same themes that are in the Federalist Papers, the cause of factions, religious persecution, conflicts between France and England, etc. So the Henry VI plays, to put them simply, is Henry VI is the most pious of the English kings. He is the son of Henry V, who managed to bring church and state together.
Oh, yeah. We happy few, we band of brothers. The warrior king.
You got it. That's exactly right. And so he also, in a way, redefines Christianity for the English. He speaks not in terms of a universal brotherhood of man, but in speeches like the St. Crispin's Day speech and elsewhere, Henry V speaks of the great nation of England. So what you're watching and reading in those plays is the emergence of a uniquely English constitution. And by that, I don't simply mean its laws, but literally like what something is constituted of. And so what happens, though, is Henry V manages to reclaim lands in France. He's truly an extraordinary ruler. He is tough, but he's fair. He kicks out a friend of his named Sir John Falstaff, from whom he learned a lot. It's obvious that Falstaff is modeled after some kind of Socratic parody. They banter, and it's clear that they have a battle of wits and that they're very good friends. But in the end, when Henry's the sixth father becomes king, he essentially kicks Falstaff out because there is a morally degenerate and subversive quality to him. And Henry V is interesting in trying to unite throne and altar again and restore monarchy after his own father, Bolingbroke, Henry IV, had usurped the crown from Richard II, who was a divine right of king.
Yeah,
So
Professor, we'll come back to this after the break. When I was doing my Looney Tunes madcap get ready for this, there are about 4 or 5 different representations of Henry VI. He's weak, he's strong, he's cuckolded, he's a lunatic, he's mentally deficient, he's got daddy syndrome because his dad dies young, he's got these bad uncles. When we come back, give us what you think of him, not what the plays tell us, but what you think of him so that we can interpret him as we go through it with the plays. And everybody's got a view of Richard III, humpback, bad man, murderer, killed the princess in the tower. We'll cover all that. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
You know the Robertson family from the hit TV show Duck Dynasty. Now Hillsdale College offers you the unique opportunity to learn alongside the Robertsons as they dive deep into Hillsdale's online course, The Genesis Story. Every Friday on the Unashamed podcast, the Robertsons will share their insights and perspectives, learning from Hillsdale Professor of English Justin Jackson. Take a trip down south to Louisiana for this one-of-a-kind learning experience we call Unashamed Academy. Visit unashamedforhillsdale.com and enroll today. That's unashamed, F-O-R, Hillsdale.com to experience the Genesis story alongside the Robertsons.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue underway this week with Dr. Khalil Habib. He teaches political theory and Shakespeare at Hillsdale. I'm sure if you're going to go to Hillsdale, you'll take him, given his reputation. So I left you with a question, Dr. Habib. What do you think of Henry VI? With all the biography and the Shakespeare play, not what Shakespeare, but what do you think of him?
I think he represents a misalignment between soul and office. His wife says he should have been a pope. He himself says he wishes he could have been a priest. He's really not fit for the task of a monarch. His father was, but he wasn't. And I think the greater sort of framework of this whole series of plays is the problem with hereditary monarchy. We can't lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, Shakespeare really has very strong Republican leanings. It shows you what happens when hereditary monarchy rules the day. You have somebody who really should have been part of the clergy, and then you have clergy who really should have been part of the political scene. For example, Winchester is duplicitous, and in the case of his father was the perfect alignment, with soul and character, and office. So I think you have to see him in light of the political problem that Shakespeare's trying to get us to think about. And it's one, I believe, misreading of the play is I've often heard people say, well, he's weak and because he's so Christian and therefore Christianity should play no role in politics. That is just completely off the mark, because Aquinas has no problem with a Christian king serving his people in the Commonwealth, even if it means war and punishing criminals. The problem with Henry VI is that he really has the soul of a priest, because Aquinas also says priests shouldn't be in war and they shouldn't be in government. They should be in the church.
Well, how do you avoid misalignment in a hereditary monarchy? Because you're going to get who you get.
Well, I think that's the question that Shakespeare's provoking us to think about, and I think if you look at it carefully, it's pretty clear he has a lot of Republican leanings. And what I mean by that, he shows you, for example, like Aristotle, the nature of the people in relation to the aristocracy, when an aristocracy becomes an oligarchy. And his depiction of Julius Caesar, I think, also reveals Shakespeare's republicanism. If you read Caesar's own writings, he's extraordinary. But when you look at Caesar as Shakespeare depicts him, he's not. He's actually an old senile buffoon. And I think that what Shakespeare is really trying to show us in these plays is exactly what you just said. How do you avoid it? And the problem is you can't avoid it. The play King John is another example. The legitimate king is months old.
Let's talk about his uncles in the 4 minutes we have left until we'll do Richard III next week. But he's got all these people around him, his wife, his uncles. To whom does someone who's misaligned turn, or ought they just to abdicate?
No, that's an excellent question. He abdicates, and he leans heavily on his uncle Gloucester, who is the Lord Protector. And now he has judgment. Gloucester is actually a morally serious man. He represents justice and the law. But the problem is Henry really can't think for himself, and he can't judge for himself. He's really decent, but as a result of his incapacity to fill the role of that office, he ends up either leaning on his wife or on Gloucester or on Winchester, who represents the church at the time and who has designs on the throne. And so it's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, by the time you're done with this play, you're struck by how you can only conclude that there's something fundamentally flawed with a hereditary monarchy. It leads to civil war. It leads to bad leadership. And Shakespeare forces you to consider that maybe merit rather than birth should determine somebody's role in office.
Well, doesn't it also bring forth Joan of Arc, though? I mean, it might bring forth bad things for England, but it brings forth Joan of Arc for France.
Yeah, and Joan of Arc is interesting. She's got a foil in the English history plays by the name of Talbot. He's the English hero. And Joan is there to show us the contrast between France and England. And the question that I always ask is, why does France need Joan and why does England need Talbot? If you look at the way Shakespeare presents it, you've got a tale of a centralized authority, an absolute monarchy in France, where the men and the aristocracy have no independence beyond the will of the king. And so consequently, the most manly person in that side of the pond is Joan. In England, you have Talbots because it's so deeply decentralized and that it unfortunately leads to factions, but it also leads to extraordinary military men like Henry V himself, Talbot, and others. And that's a nice pairing that Shakespeare does, because I think he wants to show you these two extremes, decentralization in England and centralization in France, and why the characters in France are the way they are. They really stem from the regime and its principles.
Last question for this hour. Did he offend when he wrote the Henry trilogy?
Could I what?
Did Shakespeare offend anyone?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I don't think so, because I think another intention of these plays is to vindicate the Tudors, because Richard III is really the scourge that God sends to clean up the house of the Plantagenets. And so it tees up beautifully the rise of the Tudors. So, and I'm not suggesting he did that so that he can acquiesce, to flatter the court or whatever. I think he really does think that there was a healthy movement away from these Plantagenet lines to something like Tudor England.
And very last question, my late great friend, Dr. David Allen White, would argue with me for hours that Shakespeare was Catholic, and it's obvious. What do you think?
I think it's ambiguous. It really depends on the play, and how you read him. Like I said, some people could read those English history plays and say, well, no, he's showing you he's actually not Catholic. It's doubtful that he's even Christian. Look at the way he's presenting the most Christian king. But my response would be that at any time in that medieval period, everyone would have known Aquinas, and Aquinas was very clear. There is no conflict between Christianity and politics. What you have in those plays is an examination of the problems that are inherent in hereditary monarchy, not in Christianity, because there are plenty of excellent Christian rulers and priests and people throughout Shakespeare's English history plays. So I think there's some room there to see him as Catholic, or at least sympathetic. And like I said, he takes the English history plays only up until Henry VIII. And I think shows you the contributions that the church, if anything, played in actually laying the framework for modern England.
On to Richard III next week. He'll be back. Dr. Khalil Habib will be back with us next week. Don't go anywhere in America except maybe over to hillsdale.edu and find out if Dr. Habib has actually taped any of the Hillsdale Dialogue courses. I'm not sure. I'll ask him next week. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I hope you've enjoyed Dr. Khalil Habib today in the absence of both me and Dr. Arnn. I got a hold of him last week, and what a perfect set. Next week is going to be amazing. Either Dr. Arnold will be back or you'll get part 2 of Dr. Habib. I do want to tell you about the American Revolution, though. We are in the 250th anniversary, and the American Revolution did not just happen. It wasn't just a series of events that, very, very nicely took place. Hillsdale is doing their effort to make sure that that is not what you believe. Go and visit hillsdale.edu. You'll find out that the colonists did not just wake up one day and decide, we're going to have a revolution. Hillsdale has a brand new mini-series. It's free on colonial America. You want to find out what it was like from 1607? Is that the time that Jamestown is founded? Right up through 1776. Hillsdale, 6-part documentary. Hillsdale College professors are going to teach you the religious, political, cultural, and economic ideas that shaped the uniquely American culture during the colonial period. You'll learn why is there an idea about liberty, especially religious liberty, inspired by the settlers who crossed the Atlantic to preserve and practice their faith as they wanted. They'll learn how Americans organized their local governments in the time of colonial governors, but there were also colonial parliaments. There was the House of Burgess. There were all sorts of representative institutions at that time. You'll find out where America is a land of virtue and always has been, always upheld virtue. We are a country of a moral people, and our Constitution is made for a moral people. You've heard me say that. So right now, go to hughforhillsdale.com to enroll in this course, hughforhillsdale.com. No cost, easy to get started. All you have to do is go to hillsdale.com to register, and you'll learn more about colonial America in advance of our 250th. Do not miss this course, hughforhillsdale.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.